The Building State Capacity and Productivity Center, or BSCP, logo. The BSCP Center, in cooperation with the Education Commission of the States, presents Communicating About ESSA. Alan Morgan of BSCP talks with state chiefs. Alan Morgan and Joy Hoffmeister, State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the Oklahoma Department of Education, discuss bridging policy into action through focused communication.
Talk with us about communication and its value to you.
I had an advantage of having been an appointed State Board of Education member, as well as someone who had been an educator, but also through the private sector in a business that was related to education as a supplement through parent engagement and through parent partnerships. So I had a different view than someone who grew up and professionally climbed through some of the leadership ranks in education through a superintendent's career ladder, let's say, or from my predecessor who really came also from a unique perspective as well. But I served under the previous administration as a board member. So what I saw was a recognition that reform doesn't happen just because we pass a law or adopt a policy. Reform happens when people engage and do the hard work of implementing. And implementing cannot happen without communications. And so in the battle for excellence in the classroom, our teachers are on the front lines, and our superintendents and school leaders are like battalion commanders in that army. And you've got to have trust with them, because I cannot affect meaningful improvement or changes in the classroom without that communication and without building a rapport and trust. And we're not always going to agree, but we are going to make certain we are meeting with those stakeholder groups very regularly, in fact monthly, so that we have that kind of understanding of what I'm trying to accomplish, and they can help me do that in a better way. And then, you know, there's also that here's where we're not cutting it, folks, and we do that in private, and we do that where we can build together and stand shoulder to shoulder to really make meaningful change. And so, as a board member, I saw the frustration on both sides, and I was able to see that the communication was key, and also the communication to the public, so that the public could understand what was happening in classrooms, and I would tell that story through the eyes of a teacher. And we have been, I think, pretty successful in keeping the momentum of public interest and focus on education in our state since I've been in office, and it's something that I think will be truly the key for getting great things done, because it is through that public opinion that we then are able to assist legislators in understanding the significance of a vote or an initiative, and then that also builds trust with them.
Alan Morgan and June Atkinson, State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the North Carolina Department of Education, discuss using proactive and strategic communication to garner understanding and support from critical stakeholders for policy implementation strategies.
If our parents know that, then when we get to the plan, they will have been a part of the debate. They will have been a part of the idea generation. And so they can see the progression. And then they, even though they may not all agree with what will be our ultimate accountability system, they can understand the process. The second advice is that if you want an idea to stick, if you want people to support what you're doing, remember that you need to communicate at least 10 times. And if you do not communicate in different venues, in different areas, then people will not remember. So you've got to continue to talk about it. You've got to have a very succinct message to communicate. One thing that we have started saying in our department as we have meetings across the state is that ESSA gives us an opportunity to measure school success by more than just a test score. So we've taken what we've heard in the past, I don't want my school to be measured by just a test score. So then we say, here is an opportunity to do that. So they are two big pieces of advice that I would give my colleagues. And then the third is that remember, no one, or everyone will not be satisfied.
Right.
So you have to have a way of you have to have a rationale about why this was not selected or why this won't work, and to keep that ongoing dialogue. In fact, I told our superintendents at our last meeting, my goal is that we have talked with you so much about ESSA that I will hear from you. Will you please not talk about it anymore? So
good luck on that. That's great.
But the other thing is that we need to recognize, the third thing is that education is dynamic in the sense that people are moving in and out. So don't fall into the trap that you've communicated, you think everything is fine, and then forget about the new superintendents, about the new principals, about the new teachers coming into the system.
Alan Morgan and Pedro Rivera, Secretary of Education, Pennsylvania Department of Education, on communicating effectively with many different stakeholders.
Tell me a little bit about how your agency communicates with this incredibly broad array of stakeholders on what will be some very new behaviors that are going to have to be put in place in Pennsylvania.
Well, as you know, in the world of education, and having spent practically well, now half my life in education, you can never communicate enough. I mean, even when you think you've saturated the market and the stakeholder groups with information, there's always someone or a group of individuals who have said, first time I've heard it, or I didn't hear it, I didn't know.
Tell me.
Yeah. So first and foremost, it's not taking for granted that we have a great communication plan in place. It's over communicating, sharing our message over and over and over again, and not assuming at all that our message is getting out to a diverse stakeholder group. So what we did first when we started off, we engaged with partners that we connect with on a frequent basis, but we've asked them to, at minimal, communicate and share this information with 10 people.
Really?
And we've given them the opportunity to share with as many people as they wanted.
Right.
And as a result, it's been amazing.
Alan Morgan and Ryan Wise, Director of Education, Iowa Department of Education, discussed the expanded role of communication across the SEA.
Then as we advance through the process, well, we have a tremendous communications team here led by Stacy Hupp. One thing her and I talk about regularly is that communications isn't just the job of the communication team. It's all our job at the agency. And so it's really those people working in the programmatic units that are helping develop and design each component of the plan, ensuring that they have the support they need to communicate effectively with those constituents and stakeholders they're working with regularly. So it's really taking that, I think, that team approach and ensuring that others are empowered to communicate with those in the field, and that ultimately we're all aligned on what we're working toward.
Alan Morgan and Jeremy Anderson, President of the Education Commission of the States, on the role of communication in supporting education policy.
We saw a lot of the trends that we're seeing here at the Education Commission of the States from across the country. And I really put it into 3 categories. One is collaboration, one is communication, and one is continuity. Communication is a key one that we've seen. And we've seen from previous policies that have been put in place, it's never easy to put a policy in place, but it's easier to put it in place than it is to communicate what that policy means to the students and parents that it's going to affect.
What's your position, or the Education Commission of the State's position, on how strategic communication can be undergirded, can be emphasized as an important, a very, very important element of what they do going forward to creating a plan?
most state agencies, they have a really good idea about what they need to communicate, but they don't always have the staffing capacity or the funding to really get a message out and teach everyone in their state why this policy is of value, or what are the values the policy brings for their family or their students. I think the one thing that we would push the most, and at the Education Commission of the States we're going to continue to talk to states about, is learning from each other. If one state is having success, I think on college and career ready standards as an example, Kentucky did some really good communication early on with that. Those successes were opportunities for other states to say, how did they do that? And why did they communicate more often than we are? And what was the outcome from that? That's really where the value is. And so the opportunities for states to change the policies is great. The need for them to communicate the value to the parents, to the students, to the teachers, to the communities that they're serving is probably even more important.
The BSCP Center and Education Commission of the States would like to thank Joy Hoffmeister, State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the Oklahoma Department of Education; June Atkinson, State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the North Carolina Department of Education; Pedro Rivera, Secretary of Education, Pennsylvania Department of Education; Ryan Wise, Director of Education, Iowa Department of Education; Jeremy Anderson, President, Education Commission of the States; and Dr. Alan Morgan. This podcast is in the public domain. While permission to reprint is not necessary, links to the podcast should be cited as BSCP Center Producer, 2015, June 15th, Opportunities and Challenges Brought On with Policy Leadership Shifts in SEAs, a conversation with SEA Chiefs, BSCP Center podcast. Retrieved from http://bscpcenter.org. This podcast can be viewed on www.bspccenter.org. The podcast is prepared by the BSCP Center under Award Number S283B120042 for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education of the U.S. Department of Education, and is administered by Advance Research Incorporated. The content of the podcast does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education or the U.S. Department of Education, nor does mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government.